Chapter 931 Unforgettable Night Surrounded by Bodies, Part 2. In any case, I'll be back in a few hours. Wu Yijun nodded toward her mother after descending the stairs, before looking toward her grandfather and nodding, in a considerably more casual manner, causing Wu Jianhong to smile bitterly. It seemed that he had lost much of the affection or respect that his beloved granddaughter used to have for him. In fact, Wu Jianhong noticed that his granddaughter had matured and grown up a lot into a splendid woman in her own right, and she probably wouldn't have been so sympathetic to him if it weren't for all the memories they had together. Go, child. Sun Ling waved her hand with a smile on her face. She suddenly looked at Bai Zemin and said in a playful voice, I wouldn't mind if I get a grandchild or two this early though. Mom. Wu Yijun's eyes widened and her face soon turned as red as the long coat she wore over the beautiful, purple turtleneck sweater that emphasized her upper curves to an astonishing level. Let's get out of here before the children get corrupted. Bai Zemin looked at Sun Ling grimly and left as he snorted. Strive to give me a girl and don't worry if you don't want to come back tonight. Mom. Bai Zemin could feel his left eye twitching uncontrollably as he hurried out of that house while carrying Callie on his back with Bai Shilin clinging to his cloak following close behind. He heard Wu Yijun telling her mother that she would return in about 2 hours before the door of the house closed, followed by hurried footsteps approaching. I'm sorry for my mom's behavior. She's a little weird sometimes. Wu Yijun apologized with her face still as red as an apple. Bai Zemin didn't even get a chance to say anything when Lilith beat him to it. Little sister Yijun, what are you apologizing for? Aunt Sun is undoubtedly a funny person. Funny? Wu Yijun looked at her with wide eyes and said in an incredulous voice, Big Sister Lily, did you even hear the words my mother said? Of course I did, I'm not deaf. Lilith smiled sweetly and said kindly, she was just talking about wanting grandchildren, what's so strange about that? No. Well? Wu Yijun looked at her speechlessly. Wanting grandchildren was nothing weird or strange and nothing wrong with it. The problem here was that Sun Ling clearly wanted Wu Yijun to give birth to Bai Zemin's children, but Lily didn't seem to realize it or was just pretending she didn't know anything. Bai Shilin looked at the faces of the three people confused as she had no idea what they were talking about. But before she could ask any questions, Callie's voice interrupted her. Everyone in this world is a bunch of perverts. Bai Zemin really wanted to dig a hole and bury his head in there. Even Callie seemed to be losing faith in him because of certain people. The group of 5 had walked for about 5 minutes and naturally encountered a few more people walking around the streets of the privileged area of the base. Although they definitely attracted attention, especially from some younger men who surely lived comfortable lives thanks to some relative with some ability or a lot of luck, no one dared to disturb them when they met Bai Zemin's blood-red eyes. It was around that time that Bai Zemin noticed a person walking towards them from the direction they were heading, and the moment he noticed this person, he was also noticed. Second mother, Bai Shilin let go of Bai Zemin and went running to meet Shangguan Bingshui. Soon, the big whitish-haired beauty and the little slightly silver-haired beauty found themselves hugging each other as the rest of the group closed the distance. What a surprise. While stroking Bai Shilin's silky soft hair, Shangguan Bingshui glanced at Bai Zemin before looking at Lilith in her human form and finally stopping on Wu Yijun. I was just coming to visit you to chat about something. Oh, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid that will have to wait. Lilith interrupted. Shangguan Bingshui looked at her blankly and said coldly, wait? And why is that? Bai Zemin would have face-bombed except that both of his hands were busy under Callie's thighs keeping the girl from falling or hanging off his back. These two women really couldn't get along at least a little? Every time they saw each other it was like trying to mix a bucket of burning lava with a block of ice. It's because as you can see we are heading to Zemin's house. Lilith still had a smile on her face and her eyes sparkled with a hint of amusement as she looked into the ice-cold blue eyes of the woman in front of her, mother. Oh, I mean Zemin's mom, by the way. Anyway, she's preparing a family dinner now, And given the time of day, she'll probably finish soon, so we can't keep everyone waiting for us. I hope you understand. She was definitely teasing and picking on Shangguan Bingshui. Bai Zemin sighed in his heart while Wu Yijun didn't know what to do in this kind of situation with her eyes going back and forth between each of the girls. If it was the Shangguan Bingshui from the past who restrained herself and hid her true character in front of everyone, then Lilith would definitely have gotten her to turn around and walk away with a defeated expression on her face. The problem was that the Shangguan Bingshui that Lilith had in front of her was not exactly the same Shangguan Bingshui from almost a year ago, just like Bai Zemin was no longer the same past self. Indeed, Shangguan Bingshui's lips curved slightly upwards into an incredibly charming smile that left Wu Yijun at a loss for words. I see. She nodded toward Lilith before crouching down to face Bai Shilin. Shangguan Bingshui combed the girl's hair a little and said in a sweet voice, "My sweet Shilin, Mommy has to go as your grandma Yi is waiting for all of you at home for a yummy dinner." Bai Zemin was speechless as he looked at the woman in front of him. The most surprised of all was undoubtedly Wu Yijun, who was dumbfounded as she watched the events unfold. Who was this person in front of her? The Shangguan Bingshui she had known all her life had not only just smiled, in a way she had never seen before, but was also playing with her words to lure Bai Shilin to her side. Eh? Mommy, where are you going? Bai Shilin suddenly asked, feeling confused. Shangguan Bingshui kissed Bai Shilin's forehead delicately and stood up as she slowly said, "Mommy is going home. Just like you and everyone else, your mommy also needs dinner." It was then that the corner of Lilith's mouth twitched very slightly as she murmured in a voice that only she could hear, "Not bad." Indeed, upon hearing Shangguan Bingshui's words, Bai Shilin looked at Bai Zemin and asked using her tender voice that no one could refuse, "Father, can Mommy Bingshui have dinner with all of us? We are a family after all, aren't we?" How could Bai Zemin say no when Bai Shilin was looking at him with those puppy eyes? He had been away from his daughter for most of her life, even if it was only a few months. Besides, he really had no reason to reject Shangguan Bingshui. Quite the contrary, she was undoubtedly the person closest to him, leaving aside romantic and family relations. Of course, she can. Bai Zemin nodded and looked at Shangguan Bingshui with a faint smile. "Let's all go together. I'm sure my mom will be happy to see you." Shangguan Bingshui smiled slightly and looked at Lilith. Her blue eyes glittered slightly as she slowly said, "So he said." Lilith chuckled and said nothing, much to the frustration of Shangguan Bingshui, who, far from seeing her upset, what she saw was this woman she considered her greatest rival in life clearly enjoying the course of events. Although along the walk Shangguan Bingshui noticed how Wu Yijun looked at her in astonishment and apparently wanting to ask something, neither of them really spoke much, and except for Bai Shilin's sweet voice, the group remained silent, a silence that many might consider uncomfortable, but many others would definitely think the opposite. Finally, everyone arrived at Bai Zemin's house. Bai Zemin's mother, Yi Linger, was clearly delighted with the presence of Wu Yijun and Shangguan Bingshui. However, she was clearly more delighted to see Lily. "Lily, child." She practically ran with tears at the edge of her eyes as under Lilith's surprised eyes she drew her into a motherly embrace that confounded her senses completely. Yi Linger seemed not to notice the rigidness of the young girl in her arms, and her maternal instincts kicked in as she caressed her glossy black hair and whispered in a choked voice, "I heard you followed Zemin to the other world, and that's why you were nowhere to be found. Thank God you're well. Thank God you're safe." To explain Lily's absence, Shangguan Bingshui had no choice but to make up a story that Lily jumped into the portal together with Bai Zemin, deciding to follow him at the last moment. Although this was not something she wanted to do, as it would raise Lilith's prestige to a new level, the options were not really many back then. Since Bai Zemin's family knew that Lily was a soul evolver, since she followed him to all the battlefields, and despite not knowing what kind of skills he possessed or how strong he was, they all believed Shangguan Bingshui's words. Bai Zemin noticed how his beloved's pupils trembled almost imperceptibly as she slowly melted into his mother's embrace. Seeing this, he sighed in his heart and a glint of sadness shone in his eyes. Although he tried to be as loving as possible and made sure to express his affection for her at least a few times a day whenever the situation allowed, a mother's love was irreplaceable. For Lilith, who had lost everything years ago, receiving this kind of sincere affection from Xietain, who saw her as if she were her daughter, was certainly overwhelming in many ways. After hugging Lilith for a while, Xietain wiped away the tears that were suspended on her long eyelashes and said with a cheerful smile, "Everyone, please wait a few minutes in the living room. Dinner will be ready soon." Of course, it was not so easy to dismiss the girls as soon they all headed to the kitchen to help Xietain, who had no choice but to give in to the insistence of the three women. Bai Zemin glanced at Bai Sherlin, who was trying to strike up a conversation with Callie without much success before turning his eyes to the kitchen. The backs of Shangguan Bing Shui, Lilith, Wu Yijun, his mother, and his younger sister working together in the kitchen somehow relaxed him, and without him realizing it, he couldn't help but smile in relief. However, the relief Bai Zemin felt didn't last long when his father's voice, not different to that of a demon, sounded a short distance behind him. "Leaving aside Lily, who will certainly stay the night, I wonder if your mother will let these two defenseless, not so defenseless young ladies go home in the middle of this cold and dangerous night." The smile on Bai Zemin's face slowly receded as he slowly turned to look at his father, who rested his back on the beam where the double door connecting the kitchen and dining room was located. Bai Dilan had both eyebrows raised, his eyes glittered, and a corner of his mouth was curved upward in an arrogant, suggestive angle that practically cried out to be punched as he said with an exaggerated sigh, "I hope tonight won't be so noisy." Just one Lily was enough to shake the house. I can't imagine what will happen if we add an even more powerful Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Yijun to the equation. Before Bai Zemin could say anything, Bai Dilan turned around and waved his hand as he walked off to join the two little kids. Well, good luck with that. Chapter 932 Unforgettable Night Surrounded by Bodies, Part 3. Dinner was brought to the table which, although considerably large for a normal-sized family, soon became a bit crowded as a total of 9 people sat around it, leaving only one of the 10 chairs free. The truth was that although Xietain said dinner would be ready soon, it wasn't until 30 or 40 minutes later that everyone was able to sit down to taste the dishes. This was because Xietain certainly did not expect so many people at home today, as Bai Zemin had told her earlier that he would not be bringing many people, so Xietain was right in thinking that her son would only bring one person. But due to different coincidences of fate, that number grew and Xietain was forced to cook more. Of course, there were no words of complaint coming out of Bai Zemin's mother's mouth, and her bright expression exposed how delighted she was with the whole situation. She didn't stop chatting with the 3 girls even for a second, asking them questions of all sorts ranging from clothing preferences to what they liked to do when they had free time and weren't working or leveling up. Bai Dilan was also enjoying the dinner, and when he tasted one of the dishes in particular, which consisted of meat with sautéed vegetables, his movements paused for a moment before he said with surprise, "This dish. Who cooked it?" Bai Zemin and the others looked at Bai Dilan thinking that the dish might not be good, but when they saw the man's bright eyes, they all realized that it was actually quite the opposite. Xietain looked at the dish before looking at the one who had cooked it with a proud smile. "Dilan, that dish was prepared by Bing Shui. This girl is actually even better than me in the kitchen. You should have seen how skillful her movements were, practically flawless and full of elegance like that of a true professional." "Oh." Bai Dilan looked at Shangguan Bing Shui with surprise. However, he couldn't look at her for more than a few seconds before he sensed something was wrong, so he was forced to retract his eyes as he calmly said, "Quite impressive, indeed." Despite being restrained, she was not as skilled as Lilith, and Shangguan Bing Shui's charm was actually very high at this point. If a man interacted too much with her, he would probably fall prey without even knowing it. Even Bai Dilan was no exception, and if he was not careful he would fall into a daze. something that would later become something he would be mocked for, especially by his son Xietain. This was also the reason why Lilith did not show her true form before them and kept practically 90% of her charm sealed, or else it would be a much bigger problem than just falling into a daze for a few seconds. Dinner went on without too much trouble, with Xietain mostly focusing on the three women whom she already considered her daughters-in-law. At this point it was as if Xietan's opinion on the whole matter had long since become unimportant. Even Callie seemed to realize what was happening. The girl gently tugged on Xietan's sleeve, and when he leaned in slightly, she whispered softly, "Bullet, it looks like it will be hard for you to slip through this." Xietain was surprised, but soon a wry smile appeared on his face as he understood what she was talking about. He would have to be careful from now on more than usual. If there was one person who didn't seem too happy, it was Ming-Chi, and although Xietain told her not to be jealous as she would always be the princess of the family next to Bai Sherlin, this only served to make the girl's mood even worse, to the point where she soon stopped eating while pouting. Ouch! Xietain jolted as he was kicked in the shin. He looked around for the culprit, but soon found himself looking at his sister, who was looking at him as if he was her enemy, causing him to not know whether to laugh or cry. Approximately 30 minutes later, the dishes were wiped clean, and this time Xietain became severe as she literally ordered the three women to leave the crockery for her to take care of. Xietain was only a level 18 human woman, but her power seemed to be so overwhelming that not only did she have the second highest general of the entire Transcendent faction only behind Xietain nodding obediently, but the same applied for the woman who was basically the highest political authority, again only second to Xietain. She even subjugated a sixth-order higher existence. Today, Xietain learned a little more about the power of mothers. Even if they were weak, they were in fact invincible. But, Mom, no buts, Xietain. Xietain was silenced before he could finish his words. He knew that when his mother called him by his full name, it was because there was no room to negotiate or discuss options. Xietain rested both hands on her hips and opened her eyes wide as she looked at her son as if disgusted, and said in a reprimanding voice, "You little brat, you want to send these young ladies home at this time of night? What will happen if suddenly a giant mutant bird appears and attacks them, HM? Can you take that responsibility? If a giant mutant bird attacks Shangguan Bing Shui or Wu Yijuan, then the two girls will surely be eating bird at their homes for days to come." Of course, Xietain only dared to say these words in his heart, while on the surface he nodded with a defeated expression on his face. Xietain nodded in satisfaction and quickly smiled as she tousled her child's hair. "Well, Xietain, don't make that long face as if it were the end of the world." Xietain could feel his father's gloating gaze prickling his back, and he vowed payback. "Father, my dear father. If only you knew what awaits you tomorrow, I'm afraid you wouldn't be smiling like this." Xietain hoped his father would sleep well tonight, because in the nights to come he might have to sleep on the couch at the best of fates, or with little Snow at the worst of fates. Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Yijuan looked at each other a little uncomfortably when the choice of deciding what to do was taken away from them. However, the two girls knew in their hearts that this setup was not one they were really against. It was just that there was a problem that needed to be solved first. "This, Aunt Yi." Wu Yijuan hesitated for a moment before saying in a low voice, "I'm afraid neither I nor Bing Shui have any clothes to change and spend the night. Therefore, don't worry about that, little Yijuan." Xietain smiled as if it was no big deal and said calmly, "I've already thought of everything." She looked at Ming-Chi, and Ming-Chi's expression changed as she knew what was about to happen. "Mom, no." "What do you mean by no?" Xietan's expression turned serious, and she soon put her hands to her waist as she looked at her daughter, daring her to say more as she tapped her foot on the ground gently again and again. Ming-Chi knew that this was her mother's "if you say something you already know what will happen" posture. It was hard for her to find excuses, but she finally said with some embarrassment, My clothes are not so big for them, em?" Xietain blinked in surprise upon hearing this, and her foot movements stopped while she looked at her daughter's body carefully. Ming Qi was undoubtedly a beauty, there was no doubt about it. It was just that she was a 17-year-old beauty who was still growing, especially in the chest area, which despite not being small at all, was certainly not large. Yilinger looked at Shangguan Bing Shui and then at Wu Yijuan and finally realized that there was a problem. Situation. Bing Shui may be fine, even though it will be tight and uncomfortable for her. But this Yijuan girl. Yilinger took a close look at the girl's bosom and immediately dismissed the idea of wearing Ming Qi's clothes on her. Wu Yijuan's bosom. Those two treasures were even bigger than Yilinger's, who was a fully grown and mature woman. Forget about Ming Qi, who was basically a teenager on the verge of early adulthood. Ming Qi looked at Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Yijuan with eyes that practically sprayed flames to the dismay of the two women who did not know what to do in this kind of situation. It was then that Yilinger's salvation and Bai Zemin's nightmare spoke. Mother, there is no need to worry. Actually, I have some sleeping clothes in Zemin's room. Eh? Lily, are you sure? Yilinger looked at her son's partner in surprise. I don't think I found clothes of yours in Zemin's room before. Hee, mother. Lilith stood up and walked towards the stairs as she said with a chuckle, just wait here for a moment, I'll get them. Yilinger nodded silently despite feeling confused. She had been in her son's room numerous times and made sure to keep it free of the tiniest speck of dust while waiting for his return for the past half year, but she hadn't seen any women's clothes there at all. Bai Zemin felt a bad premonition in his heart. So he joined his father in pouring himself a glass of water in order to prepare his heart. However, he had not swallowed the first sip of water when Lilith's voice sounded from the upper steps. There they are. Just like everyone else, Bai Zemin looked up to see Lilith excitedly walking down the stairs with 3 sleeping clothes in her outstretched arms. However, although those clothes were indeed sleepwear, they were not just ordinary sleepwear. PFFFFFT. Bai Zemin spat out the water in his mouth in jets and soon began coughing furiously. Bai Dilan suffered the exact same fate that his son did as he began coughing on the verge of death with a red face due to the lack of oxygen in his lungs as he stared at the clothes his daughter-in-law brought. What? Ming Qi looked at her brother's girlfriend with her eyes as wide as headlights. Specifically, she was looking at the clothes. Even Yilinger was taken aback when she saw Lilith step forward and hand a white silk baby doll with lace embroidery on the chest area to Shangguan Bing Shui. Aren't they pretty? Lilith let out a giggle as she handed another baby doll to Wu Yijuan. This one was a deep purple one, and unlike the white one, it was considerably more daring as it was actually semi-transparent in some areas. She turned to look at Yilinger as she held up a black silk baby doll with lace embroidery on the lower part. This one is mine. Wonderful. What? Bai Zemin looked at his mother in shock, but she was no longer paying attention to him at all. Yilinger's eyes literally sparkled and the smile on her face was so big that her white teeth were all exposed. Lily, dear, you really are a genius. The best. She looked at the 3 baby dolls and then at the 3 women, of which 2 were as dumbfounded as the rest in this room. With these sleeping pajamas, no one will have any more problems tonight. Pajamas? This was clearly lingerie, sexy lingerie. Bai Zemin almost fell to the ground when he heard the words of his mother, who wasn't fooling anyone by trying to feign ignorance. Hee. Lilith smiled proudly as she looked at Bai Zemin with playful eyes. She was clearly enjoying all of this more than anyone else. Bai Dilan swallowed audibly as he looked at the 3 night dresses. His eyes moved in automatic mode and even he couldn't help but give them an extra glance at the 3 women, while for the first time in his life he began to feel a bit envious of his son. Suddenly, Bai Dilan felt a chill run down his spine as a feeling of death rose over him. Bai Dilan didn't have and didn't dare turn to meet the devil's gaze. He coughed to clear his throat and turned up the stairs as he said in a wavering voice, "Gee, good night, guys. I'm a little tired, ha ha ha. Let's call it a day, Bai Dilan shuddered as he heard a low snort from behind him and soon disappeared on the 2nd floor. Yilinger muttered something to herself as she slowly turned her eyes, now sparkling again, back to the three beautiful women. Then, she looked at her son and nodded in satisfaction. Tonight, he would sleep surrounded by beauties. Yilinger didn't believe that something good wouldn't happen. Who knows, 9 months from now she might have 3 grandchildren. Chapter 933 Pajama Party. Xietain watched as his father retreated from the battlefield, and in his heart he could not help but curse him for being a deserting soldier. However, he quickly calmed down and tried to analyze the situation he was in. Xietain knew in his heart that Dylan, his father, had little if anything to do here, so it didn't really matter if he stayed or if he left. No. In fact, it was better if Dylan got the hell out of here. Xietain was sure that if his father stayed any longer, not only would he be of no help, but Yilinger would soon become a widowed woman as well as the murderer of her own husband. It was impossible to blame Dylan. Xietain admitted this fact in his heart as he looked at the 3 baby dolls. He had already seen Lilith wearing this kind of sexy clothing in the past. She was simply a bombshell in her own right, capable of driving crazy even the saints. The problem was that Xietan's imagination got a little out of control as he envisioned Wu Yijuan's devilish body and Shangguan Bingshui's perfectly proportioned body wearing that kind of attire. Cough. He quickly regained his composure and seizing the opportunity turned up the stairs. Gee, good night, you all. I'm a little tired. Let's call it a day, Xietain might not have noticed, but the women in the living room certainly noticed a certain situation. Father. Those words are what grandfather said just now. Xietain almost burst into tears when he heard Charlene's voice behind him. The innocent girl had no idea what was happening. In her bright black eyes, the world was fun and great when she was with her family, and so there could be no bad things. Little did she know that she had actually just helped dig the grave of her dear father who had shared part of his deepest records with her. Xietain? Where are you going? Lilith quickly moved forward, taking advantage of the fact that his footsteps had stalled under by Charlene's sudden tackling. She reached under the arm he was using to hold the staircase railing and stood one step up to block his path. What are you doing? Xietain asked in a calm but deep voice. That's my question. How can you leave when the party hasn't even started yet? Lilith pouted and stretched her arms out as if to say she wouldn't let him pass unless he knocked her down right there. Party? Xietain frowned and muttered under his breath. Even though he knew that no one knew anything about any party, Xietain subconsciously turned to look at his younger sister, but seeing her hastily shake her head, he looked at Shangguan Bingshui and Wu Yijuan, who looked as dumbfounded as he was with everything that was going on. Right, party. Yilinger clapped her hands with sparkling eyes and looked at Lily as if she was looking at not only the best daughter-in-law in the history of existence, but also her best ally. Pajama party. Wu Yijuan, Shangguan Bingshui, Meng Qi, Kali, Xietain. What? Charlene, yay. Pajama party. After becoming the voice of silence, Charlene put a finger to her mouth and turned to look at Yilinger as she said in an innocent voice, Grandma, what's a pajama party? Yilinger stroked Charlene's hair as she explained with a victorious smile on her face. A pajama party is when several people, be it friends, family, or any other relationship, stay over for the night and have fun together chatting or playing games until late hours. Oh, indeed, Charlene's eyes shone brightly upon hearing this. She ran to Xietain and hugged him tightly as she said cheerfully, Father, can she stay up late playing with you all? No. Xietain said in a serious voice. Charlene immediately pouted and made puppy eyes as she looked at Lilith before running over to Shangguan Bingshui and looking at her in the same manner. Third mother, second mother, you two are always so good to Charlene. Can Charlene have a pajama party with all of you? Pretty please, this. Shangguan Bingshui immediately found herself falling into a difficult situation. Actually, she had planned to go discuss something regarding Xietain with Wu Yijuan, and that was precisely the reason why she was heading to her place a few hours ago. However, upon meeting Bai Zemin's group, everything changed. Putting aside the obvious provocation from Lilith, Shangguan Bingshui did not feel good in her heart when she realized that everyone was going to Bai Zemin's house, but apparently she was the only one who was being left out and uninvited. Therefore, she used some tactics to make the word invitation pop into everyone's mind, and by adding Bai Shilin to the mix, everything worked out perfectly. Little did Shangguan Bingshui expect that rather than going to Bai Zemin's house, she would practically end up digging a well from which in normal circumstances she could easily escape, but given the situation, it was no longer so easy. But, she really couldn't wear those kinds of clothes. My dear Shilin, I actually think it would be good if new novels chapters are published in. Shangguan Bingshui's words got stuck in her chest as she saw Bai Shilin's eyes suddenly start to fill with tears, while staring at her waiting for her next words. It was then that Lilith closed the distance and hugged Bai Shilin from behind. She kissed the top of the girl's head and said in a gentle voice, "My little Shilin naturally can have her pajama party." "Really?" Bai Shilin raised her head and looked at her still somewhat on the verge of tears. "Of course, really." Seeing Lilith nod earnestly, Bai Shilin's tears practically disappeared as if they had never been there in the first place, and she turned to hug her back. "Third mother is the best." As Shangguan Bingshui was dumbfounded and realized that she had apparently been overtaken by her greatest rival, Lilith chuckled as she looked at her with disdain. "Fine. Be Bingshui?" Wu Yijun looked in shock at Shangguan Bingshui, who was slowly getting to her feet. Her eyes widened as she felt the resolve in her good sister's eyes, and she whispered in disbelief, "You'll really wear that? Those clothes?" Despite knowing that she was walking willingly into a trap, Shangguan Bingshui had sworn to herself to never again allow the woman in front of her to take the lead in anything, regardless of how insignificant it was. "Isn't it just a pajama party? No need to make a fuss over such a small thing." She snorted as she looked at Yilinger. "Auntie, can I please borrow your bathroom? I'll take a shower first." Yilinger's eyes flashed and she quickly pointed upstairs. "The upstairs bathroom has a bathtub. Although it's not very big, it can definitely fit 3 or 4 people. In that case, excuse me." Shangguan Bingshui nodded, and under the gazes of everyone present, she walked towards the stairs. "What, Bingshui, are you serious?" Bai Zemin looked at her with wide eyes and subconsciously stepped aside to let her pass when he saw the seriousness on her face. Shangguan Bingshui didn't even look at him. She walked up the stairs, and as Yilinger called out to her from downstairs where the bathroom was located, she soon disappeared from everyone's sight. "Mother, you." Bai Zemin frowned as he looked at his mother and said in an unusually serious voice, "I don't like what you are doing." Yilinger also noticed that her son was starting to get angry. Although Bai Zemin was usually very tame and practically always listened to her, he also had a strong temper that when it got out of control even Yilinger could not control. Past events spoke for themselves when he broke his classmates' legs in high school. Of course, Yilinger knew that her son would never raise a hand to her. However, she didn't want him to be upset with her. "Zemin, if Bingshui really didn't want to do it, then do you think with her personality any of us could force her?" she said with a sigh. Bai Zemin frowned as he heard his mother's words. He knew in his heart that what she said was true. Considering Shangguan Bingshui's firm and decisive personality, she would never do something that deep in her heart she disagreed with, especially when it came to showing so much skin in front of a man. But Bai Zemin's words were interrupted when Yilinger said in a soft voice, "Child, you will soon be going to the war even though you came back from another world not too long ago. Zemin, even though many people in the faction treat you as someone irresponsible who disappears without a trace, and delegates jobs to others, people like me know that you work harder than anyone else to keep us all safe." Bai Zemin said nothing and let her continue as he looked at her silently. "You are the one who works the most, but since the beginning of this whole ordeal you haven't had a day off. I think it's time for you to relax a bit before you collapse." Yilinger sighed as she shook her head. "Bingshui and Yijun are very good friends of yours, aren't they? Lily here is your girlfriend, Shilin is your beloved daughter, Callie is a person who followed you across worlds. And Cheer is your little sister. What's wrong with spending a night together chatting and joking around a bit? Under normal circumstances, Xietain would certainly be able to immediately identify where the problem was with this situation. However, even if he was currently calm and relaxed, the skilled blood berserker's wrath was certainly depriving him of almost 20% of his reasoning ability. 1/5 of the total was no small part. Sensing that there was something fishy about all this, but with his mother's words smoothing things over, Xietain finally nodded. A night to chat among friends and family. The bed in Xietan's room had been moved to Ming Chi's room, however, the large king-sized mattress stayed in the room and the mattress in Ming Chi's room that was the same size was moved to Xietan's room. The furniture was pushed into a corner so that a large space was left in the center, and with Ming Chi's and Xietan's mattresses added to the other 2 large mattresses from the guest room and, by Shirleen's room, soon a kind of soft, fluffy box spring that occupied practically the entire room was built up. Xietain had showered downstairs, alone, of course. After putting on a pair of light sleeping pants and a t-shirt with short sleeves, he went to his room under the guidance of his mother. Yilinger did not stay long but quickly retired after wishing her son a happy good night. When she closed the door behind her, she had to restrain the urge to giggle but could not fight the big smile on her face as she headed to her room. Xietain looked at the big bed on the floor. There were also several blankets in case they wanted to cover themselves during the course of the night. His mother had certainly prepared everything. There were even snacks and drinks on the bedside tables that were in a corner of the wall opposite the door. Talk among friends. Talk among friends. Talk among friends. Talk among friends. Xietain continued to repeat the same words over and over again as he sat in the center of the large bed and waited not as quietly as he would like to be for the arrival of the other party members. Chapter 934 Dark Room, Part 1. Xietain didn't have to wait long when the door was opened in a loud bang. His body jumped slightly as he opened his previously closed eyes and looked towards the door with a serious expression. Whoa! Such a big bed. Xietain subconsciously sighed in relief, releasing the air he was holding in. Shirleen looked at the large bed built by her grandmother. Her eyes shone brightly and the smile on her face was so delighted that all the enemies who died under her small but heavy fists certainly wouldn't be able to associate her with that fast and fierce little demon who exploded the heads of her opponents as if she was popping watermelons. Big Sister Callie, Shirleen will help you down now. The girl entered with careful steps and upon reaching the wall slowly sat down as she let Callie sit on one of the large couches. Thank you, Callie said casually as she rested her back against the wall. It's nothing. Shirleen smiled sweetly before sitting down in front of her and taking her hands. Let's play together. Play? No, I'm not a little kid. I don't want to. Callie's words were silenced when Shirleen began to jump up and down while taking her hands. The powerfully spring-loaded mattress certainly did its job and soon Xietain was met with the startling scene of seeing 2 girls dressed in 2-piece pajamas flying all over the place. You stop. Hee. Stop, I'm telling you. Nope. Shirleen, you. Bullet, get me out of here. Xietain couldn't help but laugh a little amused as he watched Callie's and Shirleen's almost identical hair dancing around the room. Callie, have some fun, he said with a chuckle. Xietain. Traitor. Soon, Callie was forced to surrender to her fate. Maybe this won't be so bad. Xietain smiled slightly as he looked at Callie gritting her teeth with Shirleen, leading her hopping all over the place. Callie is so mature for her age that I end up forgetting that she is only a young girl who not long ago entered her teens but has no memories of her childhood. Letting her join Shirleen, who is pure and innocent as a blank page, might be a good choice. Just when Xietain was also flying all over the place, a consequence of the jumps caused by Shirleen, the door he had closed earlier so that the noise would not be so great and avoid disturbing his parents too much, opened wide. He looked in quickly and subconsciously let out a relieved sigh. It's you, Ming Chi. Well, I'm sorry for being just me. Meng-Chi snorted in clear dissatisfaction as she entered the room and sat on the mattress, joining the jumping victims. She was wearing a two-piece pajamas just like Callie and Baisherlin, but it was obviously a more mature pajamas, and the curves of her body were exquisite even though her skin was almost completely covered. "Hey, close the door," Baizemin said as he saw her leave it open. "Humph." Meng-Chi clearly snorted in a bad mood as he looked towards the door as if expecting something. Baizemin immediately realized what was going on, and when he glanced toward the entrance of the room he was just in time to catch a glimpse of a sleek snow-white and ivory-bright leg peeking out from around the corner. Lilith took a step forward and stopped clearly on purpose outside the room to let Baizemin feast his eyes. She wore that sexy black baby doll covered in elegant lace markings, and with her left hand on her hip she rested most of her weight on one leg as she gazed at him with sparkling eyes and lips slightly puckered in a smile capable of driving even the holiest of saints berserk. Although Lilith was in her human form of Lily, so naturally it was impossible to be as perfect as her real body. Her charm was so great that every natural gesture was enough to put even beauties of the highest level to shame, just by her seductive attitude. Baizemin realized that he would never get bored of seeing her and would definitely never reach a point where he could call her body routine. She winked at him playfully before looking to her side, beyond what the people inside the room could see. "Sissy Xietain, there's no need to be shy. Not with a body as charming as the one you have." Lilith paused to look at someone else and her lips pursed slightly before entering the room and waiting standing to the side. A few seconds later, a cry of surprise accompanied by Wu Yijun's somewhat staggering body appeared for all to see, and Baizemin immediately felt a fire begin to burn in his crotch. "Bing Shui, you." After being pushed, Wu Yijun looked angrily at her friend who was still out of sight of everyone in the room. However, she quickly realized something and with a slightly pale face she slowly turned around to meet Baizemin's red eyes staring at her. Wu Yijun's baby doll was a noble purple color that reached to mid-thigh, exposing the entirety of her smooth as the finest silk legs. The material the baby doll was made of was certainly of fine and high quality, and this silk was so thin that Baizemin could see hints of her white skin beyond the nightgown. Wu Yijun was gorgeous, beautiful. Her baby face, her long legs, her soft and tender skin, every part of her body made her a woman of the highest standard that could exist. However, her greatest asset other than her face was certainly her bosom. Baizemin subconsciously gulped when he saw those two big balls bulging out and moving up-down with her breath. The cleavage wasn't that deep, but there was a good patch of fleshy skin protruding, and anyone taller than her could be delighted by what looked like a deep abyss formed by the junction of two mountains, an abyss in which countless would be willing to die by suffocation. Had it not been for the silk robe-like fabric that came to match the baby doll and added an extra layer of protection, Baizemin would definitely have seen more than he should have. Seeing Baizemin looking at her so intently with wolf-like red eyes, Wu Yijun subconsciously puffed out her chest more, which involuntarily caused them to shake. She quickly blushed so intensely that for a moment she became dizzy, and frightened for her safety she entered the room before sitting on the edge of the mattress. Baizemin's eyes moved up and down looking at those two jumping beauties in sync with the giggles of Baisherlin, still jumping in the other corner. "D-cup. Or is that a DD?" Baizemin whispered in his heart. Hee. "Sissy Xietain, can you see? Nothing to be ashamed of, but you should be proud of yourself." Lilith chuckled charmingly before looking towards the door. Her eyes glistened slightly as she calmly said, "Well, I guess the last member chickened out? Oh well, I guess she can go sleep on the couch downstairs." There was no movement for a few seconds, however, Baizemin managed to hear what seemed to be a deep sigh, and a moment later, he gasped. Shangguan Bing Shui stepped forward with an indifferent expression on her face. She stopped at the entrance to look at the situation in the room, and although it was only a second or two, it was more than enough to make Baizemin's heart start beating fiercely. The white baby doll Shangguan Bing Shui was wearing was not as sexy as the black one Lilith was wearing. Nor was it daring like the purple one that asserted and exaggerated Wu Yijuan's already exaggerated curves. In fact, it was very simple to the point that it would hardly attract attention if one were to put it in a store, next to the two aforementioned. Her baby doll was completely white, and although it too was made of high-quality silk fabric, it was not semi-transparent like Wu Yijuan's. The most eye-catching thing about this white baby doll was probably the precious-looking lace fabric at the bottom of where the cups meant to support the woman's breast were situated, along with the small ribbon of the same material and color that was right in the center of where the girl's two breasts met. Long ivory white legs that seemed to shimmer as if bathed in diamonds in the pale light of the room. A tender pair of thighs were almost fully revealed, tempting one to bite them gently or slip one's fingers delicately to feel them. Higher up, two slender arms as delicate as a doll's fell on either side of the most perfectly balanced body Xietain had ever seen in his entire life. Right. Shangguan Bingshue's body was so perfectly in sync that it even surpassed Lilith's when it came to interrelated dimensions. Slim waist, slightly wide hips, C-cup breasts, not at all exaggerated but not at all small, partially covered by the fabric of a slightly whiter color than the rest of the baby doll. The chest area was especially tempting as it exposed not only the upper part of the bust but also about 1/4 of the inner front. All this coupled with a face as beautiful as that of a legendary immortal fairy covered by an indifferent expression and blue eyes that glistened with coldness and pride capable of awakening the desire of conquest of any man. It was only 1 or 2 seconds, but from Xietain's point of view, it was as if time had frozen as he stared wide-eyed at Shangguan Bingshue's body. Beautiful. His voice slipped out without him realizing it, and by the time he realized what he did it was too late to regret it. When he looked up and met Shangguan Bingshue's blue eyes looking back at him, he quickly explained, "Bingshue, don't misunderstand me. I wasn't thinking anything lustful." She looked at him silently, fixedly into his eyes for about 5 seconds before the coldness in her eyes weakened to almost disappearance. Her pink lips curved upward slightly and she said in a soft voice, "I do know." She was not lying, just like Xietain was not lying. Shangguan Bingshue could tell from the way Xietain was looking at her that he really wasn't looking at her with the same eyes that all the other men used to look at her, even when she was properly dressed, in contrast to the current situation. Xietan's eyes were filled with appreciation, just like a talented painter appreciating a brilliant work of art in a prestigious museum. He sighed in relief as he heard her words. "Or else I would have scratched your eyes out," she added, and let out a delighted chuckle as she saw him wince for a second. "Well, not bad." Lilith looked her up and down as she nodded. Even she was forced to admit in her heart that Shangguan Bingshue was impressive in every possible aspect, to say the least. Shangguan Bingshue walked into the room and closed the door behind her. Any shyness she had felt before seemed to have disappeared, and she didn't seem to mind the fact that she was showing so much skin in front of a man, even though herself of about 10 to 11 months ago would have never even thought of such a thing, much less imagined it or done it. "So, what do we do now? Do we join the girls and hop all over the place like rabbits?" Shangguan Bingshue asked calmly. She looked at Lilith casually and said slowly, "This was your idea, you propose. If you want to hop all over the place and let Xietain find out if you're wearing anything under that baby doll, I won't stop you." Lilith chuckled. "You?" Shangguan Bingshue frowned. Xietain began to cough furiously and his eyes involuntarily shifted to the end of each of the 3 baby dolls. His thoughts began to run wildly along with his imagination. There was any clothes down there, or was there none at all? Like a cat's claw scratching at his heart, curiosity began to itch. Lilith clapped her hands, bringing him back to the real world. "Well, I have an idea actually," she said. Under the puzzled eyes of everyone, including by Sherlin, who had stopped to let Callie breathe a little, Lilith opened one of the dresser drawers in the corner of the room and pulled out a thin but long piece of black cloth. Lilith smiled like a little devil and said in a low voice, "Have you ever heard the words darkroom?" Bai Zemin and exchanged glances with all the girls in the room before looking at Lilith and asking in confusion, "Dark room? Is that a game?" "Exactly, it's a game." Lilith nodded, and under everyone's even more confused eyes, she approached Wu Yijun before starting to blindfold her eyes. "This? Big Sister Lily. What are you doing?" Wu Yijun whispered with her body stiff and tense as she lost all sense of sight to the point where the light was blocked completely. "Just like seek and find but slightly different," Lilith explained in a whispering but clear voice inside the silent room. "All players must remain inside the room. The objective is very simple, to prevent the blindfolded from catching you. Of course, you can move at will inside the room, but the more noise you make the greater the risk to you. Oh, you are not allowed to use mana or any other skill. Also, limit your senses to those of a normal human, or else this game won't be fun for anyone." Meng Qi frowned slightly and asked quietly, "And what if the blindfolded catches us?" "Our turn? Well, it's not that simple." Lilith smiled slightly and helped Wu Yijun stand up. She stood behind the sexy girl and placed her hands on her shoulders as she slowly said, "The blindfolded must move around the room in search of a target to catch. If the blindfolded, in this instance little Sister Yijun, manages to catch someone, then she must hold on to that person tightly and use all her other senses besides sight to accurately identify who she managed to catch." Bai Zemin, Shangguan Bing Shui, Meng Qi, and Wu Yijun froze when they understood what such rules implied. Basically, the blindfolded will have to touch the entire body of the caught one to identify them, Lilith said with a mischievous smile. The room remained silent for what seemed like an eternity as Lilith's words slowly but surely began to engage with what they already knew but were somehow denying, and subconsciously or not all the girls looked at Bai Zemin. Chapter 935 Dark Room, Part 2. Using our hands to figure out who we caught. Bai Zemin muttered to himself before clearing his throat and saying quietly, "I think that's a bit. You girls can play by yourselves first and I'll be a spectator along with Callie." "Using your hands to figure out who you were catching?" "Huh. Yeah, right." Apart from Bai Zemin himself, all the other living beings in this room were females. Blindfolded, senses limited back to those of normal human, and not using mana or skills. It would be a miracle if in the midst of the turmoil, Bai Zemin's hands didn't touch places they shouldn't touch. No, not only Bai Zemin's hands, but all the girls' hands too. But what happened next made Bai Zemin want to cough up 5 liters of blood and die on the spot. Callie, who had followed him since Eventide World and was part of the most important people to Bai Zemin, she, who was destined to stand by his side to become a formidable existence, betrayed him in the worst possible way. "Oh, you don't need to worry about me, Bullet." Callie's ever-indifferent face suddenly turned a bit cruel and an amused smile peeked over her pallid lips as she returned the words he spoke earlier back to Bai Zemin. "Bai Zemin, have some fun. You little traitor." Bai Zemin gritted his teeth and glared at her angrily. "Humph." Callie snorted and said in an indifferent voice, "You get what you deserve. Karma is strong and has come for you." As Bai Zemin gritted his teeth, Lilith looked at Callie and her eyes glistened with a hint of gratitude that no one noticed. Though she knew the girl couldn't see it, Lilith's lips curved into a complicated smile before it returned to normal. "All right, Zemin. Don't be a chicken." She crossed her arms under her prodigious bosoms, causing them to push up even more as she said in a mocking voice, "We women aren't chickening out, but you want to run away? Are you still a man?" Bai Zemin's expression was serious as he looked at her and said in a deep voice, "Don't you know whether I am a man or not? Don't be too presumptuous." Lilith rolled her eyes before looking at the other beauties inside the room and calmly said, "Do any of you want to get out of the game? Speak now or forever hold your peace." Shangguan Bing Shui opened her mouth to say something, but after seeing the serious and determined expression on Wu Yijun's still blindfolded face she choked on her own words and said nothing. Lilith nodded seemingly satisfied. "Very well. Since it is like this, then let me repeat the rules for you. If anyone breaks the rules, you'll be punished, so keep that in mind. Xietain didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he listened to Lilith emphasizing the rules. Now it was not only Lilith and his mother who didn't seem to pay attention to his choices, but even Shangguan, Bing Shui, and Wu Yijun seemed to be tactically accepting everything in silence. Damn it, even Meng Qi had an attentive expression on her face as she listened to the rules. Finally, Xietain secretly gritted his teeth and nodded to himself. He was not a saint in any sense, and had repeatedly rejected all of this out of respect for Lilith. However, she was always teasing him and pushing him again and again. Xietain was tired of it, and now he was determined to show her where the action she was forcing him to do could lead to. Besides, Xietain glanced sideways at the bodies of Shangguan Bing Shui and Wu Yijun before lowering his head, to look at his hands resting on his knees as he stayed seated in the lotus position. Xietain considered himself a devoted man, but if his partner fooled around with him by pushing him in like that, then letting go a little wouldn't hurt anyone, would it? It wasn't like he was going to purposely touch them like a pervert, but accidents could happen, especially when the eyes couldn't see. All right, let's start playing. Lilith clapped her hands once more with a happy smile, and this was the signal for Xietain to stand up. Lilith chuckled when she saw the change in his attitude and nodded in satisfaction. That's how it should be. She looked at Wu Yijun, who was blindfolded and with her hands on her shoulders, asked with a faint smile, "Little sister Yijun, are you ready?" "Ready." Wu Yijun nodded. "Hee, in that case." Lilith took a step back and with her hands on the side of Wu Yijun's body started to put some strength. "Here we go." Under the watchful eyes of Xietain, Shangguan Bing Shui, Meng Qi, and Bai Shilin, Wu Yijun's body began to spin rapidly, and about a minute later it wasn't hard for them to notice that the girl's feet were beginning to waver as a sign that she was starting to get dizzy. "Start." Lilith had barely said the word start when after a last turn she quickly retreated and took advantage of Wu Yijun's moment of instability to look for a place for herself. Xietain and the others did not stand still either as they quickly began to move around the room in search of a hiding place. Although it wasn't as if there were really many places to hide. But even so, thanks to the fact that Wu Yijun was blindfolded and the light had been turned off, as well as the fact that everyone was limiting their senses to those of a normal person, anywhere could be a good hiding place, even standing in the middle of the room. Xietain could barely make out Wu Yijun's silhouette in the darkness. As he squatted in a corner right next to the bedside table, he followed the girl's figure for a few seconds. Soon, however, something happened that not only he did not expect, but that no one saw coming. A shadow shot out from a corner like a panther towards Wu Yijun, who due to the sudden movement of the mattresses lost her balance slightly. Wu Yijun quickly turned around and thanks to her sense of hearing had no trouble identifying where the raider was coming from. She opened her arms wide and a moment later slammed them closed in a bear hug with the intention of catching whoever was nearby. However, this shadow was fast and just before being caught, she ducked as she passed beyond Wu Yijun. Moments later, Lilith's chuckle sounded along with a slapping sound echoing in the room. "Ah!" Wu Yijun jumped in surprise when she was slapped on the butt and as a reflex action, she quickly turned around stretching her left hand backwards with the intention of catching the culprit. Lilith felt Wu Yijun's hand brushing against her back and as she walked away she said in an amused voice, "That was close, hee." Although it was obvious that Lilith had slapped Wu Yijun, since the latter had failed to catch her she had to continue playing her role as the blindfold. As for where that slap had gone, Xietain was pretty sure that if the light was turned on now and Wu Yijun took off the baby doll, everyone would be able to see Lilith's palm mark on her backside. Lilith was not the only one who lunged at Wu Yijun and made things difficult for her. Bai Shilin was not slow to join in the fun as the girl jumped out from under the wardrobe and poked Wu Yijun's side making her scream in surprise at the tickle she felt. After about 2 or 3 minutes, everyone, including Xietain, had gotten into the game so much that even they hadn't noticed. That feeling of almost being caught when Wu Yijun's hands brushed against their bodies or managed to catch them for an instant, but they managed to break free by luck was really mind-blowing. Xietain almost got caught on more than one occasion when he jumped too gently but suddenly pushed the girl's body. After a while, Xietan's vision had become accustomed to the darkness, and so he was now able to see much better. He noticed Wu Yijun advancing carefully in his direction with both arms constantly moving forward and sideways in a desperate attempt to catch or strike gold. Crouching in a corner, Xietain held his breath and didn't even dare to blink when Wu Yijun stopped right in front of him. There was no way he could get out of here since behind him was the wall, next to him was a wall, and on the other side was one of the two bedside tables. With Wu Yijun blocking the way ahead, there was simply no place for him to flee. He looked around for something when he suddenly noticed a t-shirt lying under the bedside table. He moved very slowly and without making the slightest sound picked up the shirt before scrunching it into a ball. Wu Yijun paused for a few seconds and put all her focus on her hearing. Without being able to count on her eyes, all she could do as she walked blindly was try to detect the presence of others using what she could as a normal person. It was just at that moment when she felt a gust of wind pass right in front of her face, but though she reacted, immediately all she caught was air as she held out her hands in that direction, and only an instant later, the sound of something being hit rang out inside the silent room. Ah! Wu Yijun didn't know why that person was screaming, but she didn't stop to think about it either. Oh! Meng Qi was hiding in a comfortable position against the wall and surrounded by blankets that made it difficult for the blindfolded person to find her. However, she didn't know who was the bastard that had thrown a t-shirt that caught her unawares and hit her face, making her scream in surprise. Realizing her mistake, Meng Qi quickly stood up and prepared to run away, but her feet became entangled in the blankets and these large pieces of cloth that should have been her defense became her undoing. Meng Qi fell heavily onto one of the mattresses, and before she could get back to her feet and run she felt two long arms encircling her with a strength she would not be able to run away from. Meng Qi, it's you. The blindfolded person had to be very careful when they called out the name of the person they caught. This was because if they failed they would have to continue the game, resuming the round of dizziness. Hearing Wu Yijun's voice, Bai Shilin, who was closest to the light switch, ran over and turned it on as she watched with an enthusiastic smile the scene of blindfolded Wu Yijun trapping her aunt in a tight bear hug. Ha ha ha. Auntie Meng Qi, you lose. Wu Yijun sighed in relief and took off her blindfold. She narrowed her eyes slightly at the sudden annoyance of the enlightenment, but the smile of joy on her face was evident to all. Meng Qi's expression was dark as she looked at everyone and said through gritted teeth, "Who was the little wretch that threw that thing?" They all followed the spot Meng Qi was pointing to, and there they saw a red-colored shirt all crumpled up. It didn't take them long to figure out what had happened, and this time even Shangguan Bing Shui couldn't help but laugh a little. Meng Qi snorted and was soon blindfolded by Wu Yijun, who was finally free from her duty as a blindfold. Of course, Xietain did not step forward to admit the guilt of his actions, but stood back feigning ignorance, and looking at the others as if he was looking for the person who threw that t-shirt. Huh. What a joke. If he were to step forward now and admit that he had been the cause of why she fell and got caught, Meng Qi would definitely find some method to take revenge in the future. Chapter 936 Dark Room *, Part 3. Meng Qi had it relatively easier than Wu Yijun. She managed to catch Bai Shilin when the girl fell on her belly after suffering the same fate as Meng Qi had suffered, getting entangled in the blankets. Bai Shilin was naturally not happy with this outcome, but the rules could not be ignored or else the game would not be fun. Soon, the girl found herself blindfolded, and not much later her body was spinning in the center of the room under Meng Qi's hands. Lilith had barely turned off the light and ran when Meng Qi immediately and gently pushed Bai Shilin in the opposite direction she ran towards. Xietan's expression changed when he saw Bai Shilin running towards him with staggering but speedy steps. He quickly ran off to the other side and in the process naturally ended up revealing other people who were hiding, which caused them to curse him for a while. However, none of this mattered to Xietain. When he looked back and saw Bai Sherlin following him closely with outstretched arms and open hands, he couldn't help but exclaim loudly, "Sherlin, you're seeing, aren't you?" "Sherlin can't see anything, father." "Lies." "Sherlin is not lying." Bai Zemin shouted angrily when, after making an abrupt turn, he was followed by Bai Sherlin with a maneuver that was impossible for a normal human to do. Normal human? Holy shit. Bai Zemin soon realized the mistake they had made. Lilith had said to limit their senses to those of a normal human, but most of Bai Sherlin's records were from a weaver ant. Even if she was limiting herself to the maximum, it was obvious that she would always be much more capable than a normal human in this kind of situation. Bai Zemin gritted his teeth and ran for his life, but his expression changed when he saw a slender leg stretching out from the blind spot of the closet. Because everyone could only see what was ahead of them, no more than 2 or 3 meters at most, and because of how fast Bai Zemin was running, by the time he realized what was happening it was already too late. He fell to the mattress on his mouth and bounced several times, but quickly reacted with the intention of getting to his feet. However, Bai Sherlin jumped like a cougar, and before Bai Zemin could take the first step his body staggered forward with the girl's body clinging to him like an octopus. "Father!" Bai Sherlin's voice had barely fallen when the lights flashed on. "Hee, Daddy Zemin, looks like you got busted," Lilith said as she stepped out from the side of the closet. "You little minx." Bai Zemin gritted his teeth and vowed revenge. "You just wait and see. Ha ha ha." Sherlin won. Bai Sherlin pulled off the blindfold with one pull and began to dance with enthusiasm as if she had just hit the lottery jackpot. Bai Zemin didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he bent down on one knee and let his daughter blindfold him. However, what almost made him spit blood and die was what Bai Sherlin said to him just before pushing him away and running. "Father, remember that you can't cheat just because you lost." Despite knowing he was being childish, Bai Zemin had really gotten into the game and was really having fun in a way he hadn't had in not months but years. The lights were turned off, but he didn't care as he quickly kicked one of the mattresses and almost fell off when he flew off in the direction that Bai Sherlin had fled just a moment before. "Ah!" Bai Sherlin let out a high-pitched scream followed by several chuckles as she quickly ran around with Bai Zemin following close behind. When she looked back and saw his hands extended towards her with his fingers opening and closing similar to the claws of a monster, the successor of the former queen of the weaver ants couldn't help but scream again, this time a little desperate in the midst of the fun as she ran with everything she had. Due to Bai Zemin's swift reaction, none of the girls in the room had time to hide, and therefore the level of chaos this time was a lot higher than before. Everyone ran scared with screams and laughter as Bai Zemin brushed past several of them during his chase. The giant bed of mattresses shook and the springs showed their power, causing some of the girls to fall after getting tangled or stepping wrong. Bai Zemin didn't have much luck either as a bad bounce sent him straight to the floor. He cursed under his breath and stood up, but soon he realized that Bai Sherlin happened to be just in front of him. "Ha, you little brat." Bai Zemin leaped forward with his arms wide open and hugged tightly as he said in a victorious voice, "Gotcha." The large bed of mattresses bounced a little more as the rest found a hiding place, and after a few moments of silence, from the corner opposite the one Bai Zemin was in, Lilith reminded him, "Zemin, you have to say the name of the person you caught." However, even after several seconds of silence, the room stayed quiet and Bai Zemin did not say the name of anyone. This was because Bai Zemin had made a mistake, a big mistake. Bai Sherlin was small, she would probably only reach below his chest and barely above his stomach at most. However, even though the person Bai Zemin had caught was small, the head of this person stopped just below his chin. She was definitely an adult female. At the very least, she was definitely not a small child. If this was all, then it wouldn't be a big deal. But the problem was that when Bai Zemin locked his arms around this person, let's just say that their current position wasn't a very good one. His arms were locked in a cross shape in front of this person's body. His wide open hands stopped around the height where Bai Sherlin's eyes would meet. But since this girl was not Bai Sherlin, Bai Zemin's hands ended up catching two large objects which his brain immediately identified as the breasts of the woman who had ended up in his arms embrace. Subconsciously, Bai Zemin's hands squeezed tightly enough to feel them completely. This person made a low sound that probably only the two of them could hear thanks to her biting her lips. In addition, Bai Zemin took a deep breath as whoever the girl in his arms was moved her slender waist back at the same time as she stood on her tiptoes, probably as a result of being surprised when he squeezed her boobs. All this resulted in her pressing her soft, spongy butt all over Bai Zemin's crotch, which while covered by a pair of sleep pants, the thin fabric did little to stop him from feeling its softness. Both he and the girl froze for what seemed like an eternity. She was probably nervous and confused as she was still on her tiptoes, which meant that Soldier Zemin was properly sandwiched in the middle of paradise even if it wasn't directly. Feeling with his fingers the skin even softer than the silk he touched in his palm, Bai Zemin immediately knew who the woman in his claws was. Meng Qi was wearing two-piece pajamas and the top was properly buttoned. She was out of the question. S's by. Lilith's baby doll had the same cleavage as the woman Bai Zemin was embracing, but Lilith's breasts were larger, and the feeling her skin gave off was slightly different. Wu Yijuan's baby doll was high cleavage, but the front was fully covered. In addition, her breasts were about as big as Lilith's, so she was also completely out of the question. It wasn't Bai Sherlin. It wasn't Lilith. It was not Meng Qi. It was not Wu Yijuan. Bai Zemin almost burst into tears. Of all women in the room, he had the bad luck to grab the battering ram. Worst of all was that the Johnny between his legs had woken up and was currently poking her from behind. Bai Zemin felt his face being caressed by a few strands of silky hair, and the smell of jasmine flooded his nostrils as he heard the girl's mosquito-like voice in his embrace. You bastard, do you want me to freeze you to death? You're cheating, you stopped limiting yourself to speak in a voice that only we can speak. Bai Zemin whispered using the same tone of voice as her in an attempt to change the issue a bit. Shangguan Bing Shui could feel a rock-hard object now pulsing on her back. Worst of all was that when she stopped standing on her fingertips, the baby doll she was wearing, which was very short, got caught on that object and had now lifted up exposing her lower body. Even if she had never seen one, she certainly knew what that long hard object was. One didn't need to eat a pig to know what a pig was. Let go of me. She whispered softly as her heart beat furiously in her chest. She was a little surprised by the sudden turn of events. She also felt a little scared as she felt that beast that resembled an out-of-control raging dragon slamming into her back repeatedly as if it were a hot iron pipe slamming against a door. However, in the midst of surprise and apprehension, far from there being anger, what Shangguan Bing Shui felt was a strange emotion that she had never felt before. Putting aside the uneasiness she felt in her core of a woman, she couldn't help but feel that she was betraying her good friend, but the worst part of it all was that she kind of liked that emotion. With this realization hitting her, Shangguan Bing Shui began to go into a real panic and started struggling a bit, without wanting to draw the attention of the other people in the room. Ugh. Bai Zemin growled softly as he felt his manhood being moved from side to side. He squeezed the girl's breasts and said in a low but serious voice, "Don't move disobediently." Shangguan Bing Shui jumped back in surprise and quickly gritted her teeth, suppressing a shameful moan and turning it into a weak grunt. I'll kill you. Hearing the obviously empty threat but still a threat from Shangguan Bing Shui, Bai Zemin frowned and squeezed his hands again as he pushed his palms inward, which resulted not only in her body being pressed closer to his but also resulted in him feeling two small but hard bumps barely covered by the silk of the baby doll. Shangguan Bing Shui gasped, and as she turned her face slightly to look at him, she said under her breath, Do you have any idea what you are doing? Shangguan Bing Shui's heart was beating 1,000 beats a second as she felt the heavy, firm hands of the man rising up behind her like a mountain pressing down on her breasts. She knew this could happen ever since she took the first step into this room and heard the game they would be playing, but even then, she still didn't say no. Bai Zemin did not respond immediately, but neither did he release the woman in his embrace. If he wasn't under the effect of the skilled blood berserker's wrath, then he might not dare to this much, but with 20% of his intelligence out plus Lilith's constant teasing and pushing, things were different. As for whether he would regret it when he came to his senses, Xietain did not know and was not in a position to think that far ahead. All he knew was that, strange as it seemed, the anger he felt in his heart seemed to be almost completely suppressed when the sweet scent and soft touch of the woman in his arms aroused the lust in his heart. Therefore, he was a little unwilling to part with this rare moment of mental calm. Xietain fell into a dilemma. Should he let her go, or enjoy this beautiful feeling a little more? It wasn't as if Shangguan Bing Shui was putting up any resistance at all anyway, which meant that she clearly wasn't too much against it. Chapter 937, Dark Room, Part 4. While Xietain was thinking about what to do next, with his hand still reveling in the softness and fluffiness of the beauty's body in his arms, Shangguan Bing Shui could feel her heart rate rising higher and higher. If she still had any doubts before, this event had certainly blown such doubts to another continent with the force of a typhoon. Shangguan Bing Shui knew in her heart that if she really had the slightest of rejections towards the man who had grabbed her from behind like a wolf catching a little bunny with its claws, she would have definitely attacked him with all her might. Now, was what she felt love? Shangguan Bing Shui could not answer a question as short but at the same time as big as that. At the very least, the current her was not able to do it. Before she could answer such a question, she first needed to consider what love was to begin with, or so she felt and thought. At the very least, I think I like him. She sighed in her heart, and a wry smile appeared on her slightly flushed face as she felt Xietain's hands, literally doing whatever they pleased. She had fallen into a big dilemma now. What was she supposed to do with this? Kill those feelings before they turned into love, or before she realized they were stronger than she thought? Doing this certainly might not be that easy, but it was by far the best option no matter which way she looked at it. By forcing herself, she could become detached from those feelings of appreciation, liking, and even longing. This way, she could stop feeling so frustrated every time she thought about Lilith being with him, and at the same time avoid clashing with her best friend. However, there was a big problem with this. And that problem was that Shangguan Bing Shui did not want to choose this option. She, whose heart had been frozen under a thick layer of ice, which countless men, among whom there was no shortage of outstanding talents, tried to break but failed miserably, felt a little unwilling to pull away from the warmth that these feelings transmitted to her. At the end of the day, Shangguan Bing Shui was a woman, a young woman in her 20s. In normal times, she should be enjoying her student life at university and dating some boyfriend. Unfortunately, even when the world was peaceful, life did not allow Shangguan Bing Shui to live a normal life. Now that amidst all the chaos something warm was beginning to dawn for her, greed naturally began to grow in her heart, and she didn't want to let it go just like that. Be that as it may, neither Xietain nor Shangguan Bing Shui had too much time to stop and think too much given the circumstance they both were in. Only about 5 seconds had passed since Lilith had reminded Xietain that he needed to say out loud the name of the person he thought he had caught, when the two who had been using the enhanced senses of a soul evolver noticed that from the right wall of the room a silhouette was crawling carefully towards them. The room was completely dark, and the curtains were thick enough to block out the rays of moonlight from the outside world. This meant that no one could see anything. Even after getting used to the darkness, only 2 meters was the maximum at best. Xietain let go of Shangguan Bing Shui with some reluctance, and she too seemed to feel that reluctance in her heart, since instead of moving away immediately, she stayed a little longer with her body pressed against his as if she wanted to remember his warmth. The strategic understanding between the two was indeed divine, as with inhuman coordination, Xietain charged to the right, while Shangguan Bing Shui moved to the left. The two's footsteps were so in rhythm that the other players would think there was only one person moving on the mattress. Ah! Shirlin screamed in fright when she saw Xietain charging towards her, and in a desperate attempt to flee, the girl hurriedly jumped on her feet before turning around while waving her hand sideways as if trying to push away the invisible water blocking her movements. You little sneaky girl, come here. Bai Sherlin was out of luck when she had barely taken a step and found herself in Bai Zemin's arms. No. The girl kicked desperately and struggled, but none of this helped her to escape. Bai Zemin began to tickle her, and Bai Sherlin soon found herself laughing out loud and begging for mercy as all the strength in her body left her. The lights were turned on, and soon Bai Sherlin found herself blindfolded in the center of the room with her father making her spin quickly in the same spot to make her dizzy and mess up her posture a bit. Bai Zemin breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. No one suspected anything. They probably assumed that he had earlier pretended to catch someone and then stayed silent to attract someone's curiosity, resulting in Bai Sherlin falling into his trap. He secretly glanced at Shangguan Bingshui and noticed that she was looking at him. However, her clothes were neat and her expression was a graphic representation of absolute calm. She was so calm that were it not for the exquisite sensation he could still feel in his hands, he might have begun to doubt whether what had really happened or if it had all been some kind of hallucination of his. He couldn't help but warm up a little as his eyes involuntarily roamed over that body sculpted by the hand of the goddesses themselves. It was just then that Callie's voice made him shudder. I should definitely tell Serafina to stay away from a pervert like you. Bai Zemin looked at Callie and saw her looking in his direction with an indifferent expression that made it difficult for everyone to know what she was thinking. What are you talking about? He asked, trying to keep calm. Big brother, will you stop pretending? Meng Qi folded her arms and rolled her eyes. You were staring at Shangguan Bingshui just now. We all noticed it. Bai Zemin looked at everyone and noticed that they were all looking at him with suggestive expressions. He sighed, in his heart relieved. They all seemed to think that Callie had called him a pervert because of the way he had been looking at Shangguan Bingshui's body a moment before. But Bai Zemin knew in his heart that this was not the case. As if to confirm his suspicions, Callie added in a casual voice, you all are lucky. If I could move and play this game, you would be caught in a heartbeat. What do you mean? Shangguan Bingshui asked as she felt a bad premonition in her heart. Callie looked at her. Her pale, dry lips curved slightly as she said softly, didn't he tell you? Actually, I cannot see the world you see, but I can see another world, one that you do not, and the darkness cannot block my eyes. Shangguan Bingshui's face changed abruptly, and she subconsciously looked at Bai Zemin. When she saw him looking away, Shangguan Bingshui turned slightly pale as she realized that what had happened before in the dark was not as much in the dark as she thought. Wu Yijun looked at Shangguan Bingshui and sensed that something was not right. She had no proof, but her feminine instinct was certainly frightening. Bingshui, you. She did not finish her words. Lilith looked at Bai Zemin before looking at Shangguan Bingshui. Her eyes moved between the two of them for a few seconds with a thoughtful expression on her face. Meng Qi also seemed to notice something as her eyes darted back and forth between her brother and Shangguan Bingshui. However, her indifferent expression made it difficult to know what she was thinking or feeling about it. The only person in the room who seemed oblivious and clueless was naturally little Bai Sherlin, that was still being spun around by her father. No one said more, and only a few seconds later the lights in the room were turned off and everything went dark, which was the reason why the game was called Dark Room. Although Bai Sherlin's turn had come soon, the girl was clearly cruel and didn't know how to hold back at all. Sherlin, why are you always chasing after me? It's because father's smell is special. What? Too easy to find. And just like that, Bai Zemin was caught by Bai Sherlin again after the two of them ran like crazy, with one running away and the other chasing around the room for more than 2 minutes. As Bai Zemin sighed and knelt down to let Bai Sherlin blindfold him, he looked at Lilith and said in a low voice, Hey, how about we play something else instead? I don't think this is a good idea. Far from what he expected, Lilith not only didn't look angry, despite her face being slightly serious. She shook her head at his request and said in a firm voice, The night is young, you know. We still have hours to cover. Bai Zemin looked at everyone around him, and seeing that no one was saying anything to support him, he finally gave up. Don't blame me later for what happens. he muttered as he stood up after his eyes were covered. A minute later. Sherlin, you won't escape this time. Father, why are you always chasing Sherlin? Kid, you dare to ask me that? Xietain really didn't seem to have learned his lesson. After chasing by Sherlin for about 40 seconds, and just when he was seconds away from catching her, Xietain stumbled over the blankets and rolled over several times before jumping to his feet and lunging forward as he felt a presence about a meter in front of him. Well, at least there was one thing Xietain had learned from the previous case, and this time he didn't blurt out anything. As he felt the huge breasts of the woman in his embrace, Xietain no longer knew if the heavens were helping him or if they were conspiring against him. Two large, soft, overstuffed balls that seemed to be covered in cotton. Even though there was a thin piece of silk separating the skin of his fingers and palms, Xietain was still able to feel their softness. Even though in his heart he already knew the response, he still whispered in an almost tearful voice. Lily? After a few seconds of silence, the voice of the woman in his arms in the form of a whisper responded to his question. It is not. Of course. She wasn't Lilith. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Xietain whispered, trying to keep his composure before slowly letting go of Wu Yijuan's body. It's okay. She replied shyly. Her heart felt joy, embarrassment, and a bit of loss when she felt Xietan's hands moving off so quickly. Xietain naturally reacted to Wu Yijuan's body. She was a transcendental beauty in every way, and her seductive charm was certainly higher than Shangguanbing Xue's, unless the latter released the charm that her class bestowed upon her. However, Xietain did not know why, but he did not have the heart to take the slightest advantage of Wu Yijuan. The stiffness between his legs was proof that Wu Yijuan was attractive enough to arouse Xietan's lust and male desires, but for some strange reason, that lust always found itself being suppressed by something he couldn't understand. It was a really strange feeling that even he himself could not explain, but would certainly study now that he had noticed it. There was one thing Xietain knew for sure, and that was that Wu Yijuan was certainly special to him, or else there was no way he would react so carefully, even though he had told himself to enjoy the moment a little. Chapter 938. The situation in the north gets darker. The rest of the night went smoothly. The group composed of Xietain, Lilith, Meng Qi, Wu Yijuan, Callie, Bai Sherlin, and Shangguanbing Xue certainly had a lot of fun as they stayed up until about 3 in the morning playing all kinds of games. Dark room, question-answer, and even some board games such as Monopoly and chess. It was around 3 in the morning that Bai Sherlin asked a question that changed the dynamic of the 7. Father, why don't we go play at the world you have in your little clock? World? Little clock? Except for Lilith, everyone looked at Xietain confused and curious. After thinking about it for a moment, he found no valid reason to keep the secret from any of the people present. In fact, from various points of view, one could tell that this group of people present was the one most trusted by Xietain, with his loyal followers being the only ones missing. He looked at Wu Yijuan and said with a gentle smile, Yijuan, this is something I was going to talk to you about tomorrow, but I guess there is no harm in moving things forward a bit. Tomorrow? Shangguanbing Xue looked at the two of them curiously. Wu Yijuan looked at her and replied calmly but with watchful eyes, eager to see Shangguanbing Xue's reaction to her next words. Xietain and I will go for a walk around the base tomorrow. He told me he wanted to talk about something with me and show me one thing that so far only Lily and Sherlin have seen. Wu Yijuan was taken a little by surprise when she noticed the small but still genuinely happy smile that had formed on Shangguanbing Xue's lips. I see. Shangguanbing Xue nodded as she smiled at her as if to give Wu Yijuan courage and congratulate her on the small but still great achievement. Wu Yijuan felt her eyes grow moist as she smiled in gratitude and happiness. She was no fool, she had noticed her good sister's growing interest in the man she loved. How could she not notice the practically transcendent changes in Shangguanbing Xue's personality whenever Xietain was around? Wu Yijuan had come to think that the two would end up in antagonism at some point. but it was after seeing the sincere smile on her friend's face that Wu Yijun realized how stupid her earlier thoughts had been. It was true that she loved Bai Zemin. It was true that Shangguan Bing Shui seemed to have discovered some kind of attraction toward him that could be physical or romantic. However, it was also true that Wu Yijun and Shangguan Bing Shui had been friends practically since they were both in diapers. The two were no different from blood sisters, and in many ways, they were even closer than blood sisters. After all, how many siblings would really be willing to lay down their lives for each other? At least she, Wu Yijun, knew that she would gladly give her heart out for Shangguan Bing Shui, and she was sure that Shangguan Bing Shui would also give hers for her sake. It was just that Wu Yijun had forgotten it in a moment of jealousy. It wasn't until now, seeing Shangguan Bing Shui smile, that Wu Yijun finally felt completely at ease. She reached over and took her hand, confusing Shangguan Bing Shui slightly. Wu Yijun gently squeezed her hand and whispered, "Let's give it our best, okay?" At first, Shangguan Bing Shui did not understand what her friend meant. However, she seemed to think of something and her expression changed slightly. Shangguan Bing Shui was about to say that it was not the case, but her words stayed in her throat as she saw Wu Yijun smile. Finally, she simply sighed and said nothing. She needed time to clarify her own emotions first. Saying words without knowing how she felt didn't seem to be too smart. "Not bad, is it?" Bai Zemin pointed at the large seemingly endless world with a smile on his face. "Not bad?" Meng Qi, Shangguan Bing Shui, and Wu Yijun gasped as they looked at the surroundings in shock. This was an entire world. A world that belonged only to Bai Zemin and one which he could take everywhere at will. The possibilities were simply endless. This? Wu Yijun looked at him with wide eyes and finally understood why Bai Zemin needed to talk with her. This was too big and important a matter that could literally change everything in many senses of the word. Especially after Bai Zemin explained the difference in the passage of time within this world compared to the outside world. We'll talk about that later, but for now. Bai Zemin looked at the house and the still unfinished furniture and said with a small smile, "How about we do some work?" Lilith chuckled and shook her head as she said in a low voice, "This is probably the first pajama party in history where people wear sexy lingerie and pajamas to build a house." Meng Qi could barely contain her laughter. A big smile appeared on her previously grumpy face and she nodded, "I guess that's true." And this was how the first ever pajama party in which a group of people wearing pajamas moved in sync to build a house began. The group worked for about 10 hours, then took a break to eat and sleep. Thanks to the difference in the passage of time within the collector's pocket world, no one worried about how long they slept, and for the first time in many months, almost a year, they slept until their bodies said enough and their eyes opened on their own. They all slept between 7 and 10 hours, with Bai Zemin and Shangguan Bing Shui sleeping the longest among all. Looking at the two people sleeping comfortably under the shade of a tree, Wu Yijun pointed out, Bai Zemin came back from a world where he fought practically without rest for half a year, and Bing Shui practically carried the entire army and faction expansion on her shoulders during his absence. They both must be very tired. After everyone woke up, the group continued working while Callie went back to work on the language earring runes. About 12 hours later, and with more hands helping, the construction of the house was practically complete. Of course, there were no decorations at all, and the furniture needed some touching up, not to mention the walls needed to be covered. However, the form and foundation that were the two most difficult big steps had been completed. This house is so big that it could probably fit a whole legion. Shangguan Bing Shui commented. "Well, let's start by training mounts first." Bai Zemin chuckled. When the group left the collector's pocket world, it was around 7 a.m., so it wouldn't be long before it was time to go down for breakfast. Meng Qi looked at the sun in the sky and couldn't help but sigh. "It feels weird. We've been just over 30 hours inside the pocket watch, but here it's only been a maximum of 4 hours. Everyone shared what Meng Qi was feeling. It felt really weird. It was as if for a moment they were disconnecting from everything and everyone, as if they didn't belong to this place or to humans in general. Big brother, I know it's kind of stupid to say something like this, but, please, if at any time you feel lonely, or if at any time you feel like you don't belong anywhere, please remember that many people including myself are waiting for your return. Meng Qi gently hugged Bai Zemin's back and whispered those words in a barely audible voice. At that moment, Bai Zemin did not understand the words his little sister had spoken to him. However, he would certainly one day come to understand them, especially now that he had a treasure with the characteristics of the collector's pocket watch. Bai Zemin and his group were in charge of preparing breakfast this time. Since they were all well rested, they felt very energetic, and it wasn't a bad way to start the day and say thank you to the family waiting for them with the food ready, was it? The morning went without a hitch, and it was actually quite a warm time. Although things had obviously not turned out the way Bai Zemin's mother most wished, she was happy and relieved in her heart when she noticed that her son's shoulders were now firmer and straighter than before. As a mother, it was impossible for Xietain not to feel the pain her son was feeling even if he didn't say anything. Those red eyes were certainly not a mere skill that was triggered under certain circumstances the way he had said. She just wanted him to relax a little, nothing more than that. Besides, seeing that the internal relationships had grown was certainly something she cherished in her heart. Bai Zemin had Shangguan Bing Shui, Meng Qi, Wu Yijun, Xietain, Bai Dilan, Bai Shilin, and later all of his closest subordinates eat a meal with the Crimson Thunder Anise mutant plant powder that he and Lilith found in Eventide World after annihilating a large demon city in the center of the Forest of the Ancients. After handing the plant to Shangguan Bing Shui, he took her to a corner out of the house and said something that caught her by surprise. Bing Shui, how long would it take you to crush all resistance and conquer the rest of China? This? She looked at him with wide eyes and for a moment didn't know what to say. I had planned to stay one more day here before heading north, but I've had a bad feeling for a while now that I don't like it all. Bai Zemin said in a serious voice. This was a feeling Bai Zemin had been having since breakfast, but at that time it had not been too big, so he ignored it. However, for a while now, that uncomfortable feeling kept growing until he finally couldn't stand it anymore. Seeing the frown on his face, Shangguan Bing Shui realized that this was a serious matter. Bai Zemin had many flaws as a human being, as a soul evolver, and as a leader. However, his intuition was practically perfect when it came to bringing bad news. She grew serious and her eyes flashed coldly as she said under her breath, if I indiscriminately slaughter the entire opposition, then only a month minimum and a month and a half maximum. No. You can't do that. Bai Zemin shook his head and sighed, killing enemies is fine, but I don't want you to kill innocents just to hurry things along. Your hands have never touched the blood of innocent life, and I hope it can stay that way for as long as possible. But what about you? Shangguan Bing Shui wanted to stop, but it was too late and the words had already left her mouth. She immediately regretted it and looked at Bai Zemin a little worried, but his expression did not change at all. In contrast to Shangguan Bing Shui, who had only killed enemies, Bai Zemin had killed many innocents, especially in Oblong World and Eventide World. Don't worry about me, that's just the way it is. He waved a hand with apparent indifference. Shangguan Bing Shui knew that this indifference was not as strong as it seemed. She knew that this was a great weight on Bai Zemin's heart. She quickly changed the subject slightly without wanting to stay there for too long. If Yijun comes with me, I can conquer the rest of the country in the same amount of time without having to cause a massacre. Besides, she and her cabinet will be able to completely affirm our faction's rule in every base. Wu Yijun was simply a genius when it came to politics and government. Not even Shangguan Bing Shui, who was an outstanding talent in every aspect, could match her. This was partially because the second-order class of Wu Yijun, Queen of Nature, had a special skill capable of influencing living beings. Take Yijun with you then. Bai Zemin nodded and said in a serious voice, I wish I could start taking advantage of the inner world of my watch as soon as possible, but I feel like we'll have to wait a little longer. Yijun, she. Shangguan Bing Shui hesitated for a moment before whispering softly, She was waiting for this day excitedly. Even if you were just taking her for a walk to talk about faction-related matters. Bai Zemin sighed, but just as he was about to say something, Shangguan Bingshue's radio turned on as well as his ring of commander, and Fu Xiefeng's unmistakable anxious voice caused the atmosphere to change completely. Hey! Shangguan Bingshue. We need urgent reinforcement here. Kai Jingyi and Shen Mei were both seriously injured. The sea race for some reason now stepped in, and worst of all, they are supporting that bastard Liang Peng. For a few seconds, Shangguan Bingshue held her breath as she looked at how Bai Zemin's body trembled. She had never felt fear towards him, however, when her blue eyes met those red eyes that glowed like a demon's, she felt a chill that made her blood run cold and her face turned slightly pale. Chapter 939. Ludmila Lyonishna, 17 years ago, at the military base of the most powerful human base in the entire Chongping district. The rotor blades of a combat helicopter were thundering loudly, causing the wind to whip fiercely around, forming a whirlpool of dust and leaves. As the pilot waited and prepared the controls, Bai Zemin temporarily said goodbye to some people, including his family, who were clearly reluctant to let him go so soon. However, there was not much he could do. Work was work, especially when it involved the lives of important people. Bingshue, Yiguan, can I entrust the conquest of the west of the country to you, isn't it? Bai Zemin looked at the two young women in front of him with a serious expression and made a request that a little less than a year ago would certainly have been considered crazy. Don't worry, Shangguan Bingshue said in a firm voice. With me and Yiguan leading the army and the people, only a monster like you could stop us. Other soul evolvers can forget about putting up any resistance. Bai Zemin forced the most natural smile he could and said softly, don't you think it's a little odd that of all people you're the one who calls me a monster? Miss Monster. Shangguan Bingshue looked at him worriedly, and after a little hesitation she said softly, will you be all right? I'll be all right. Bai Zemin nodded. Although I feel that it might not be that easy for some reason, the danger I feel is not as great as other times. In other words, since he had overcome worse things, there was no reason why he couldn't overcome this one. That's not what I meant. Shangguan Bingshue shook her head. I know you will win. At this point, I think I have confidence in you to the point where if you tell me that you can kill a fourth order existence with a chopstick, I would probably believe you. Hearing her words, Bai Zemin smiled wryly and shook his head without saying anything. Your aura is quite a mess. Wu Yiguan said to compliment what her good sister had just said. Her black eyes glinted with concern as she looked at his obviously forced smile and tried to say something, but her emotions got in the way. Bai Zemin patted her head and said calmly, don't worry. I'm fine. He looked at Kong Lan and Evangeline, who were waiting for him next to the helicopter, and said in a low voice, just a little angry with everything in general. A minute later, Shangguan Bingshue and Wu Yiguan along with the others watched as the assault helicopter moved farther and farther away until it finally disappeared into the horizon with the sound of the engine and rotor blades being heard a little longer before all went silent again. The wind blew, and the people present remained silent as they looked off into the distance as if they could still see the helicopter flying away. But they all knew in their hearts that it was just their futile attempt to hold on a little longer to the image of the people that had just left. Bingshue. Shangguan Xinyue looked at her daughter, who was looking away with a lost expression, and sigh in her heart. It was hard for Shangguan Xinyue to associate this girl with that cold and indifferent girl who vowed never to fall in love or let her actions be affected by a man. Although it was certainly a very welcome change, Shangguan Xinyue still had to get used to it, and as a mother her concern of not knowing too well the young man who occupied her daughter's thoughts were there. Shangguan Bingshue closed her eyes before turning around. Yiguan, mother, let's get moving. Her eyes flashed coldly, and the mildness she had when talking to Bai Zemin a few minutes ago vanished like snowflakes falling into a volcano. We have to conquer the rest of the country in less than 2 months. Father, shall we go and wipe out the bad guys? Bai Sherlin asked excitedly. She was sitting next to Xietain in the tail cabin of the assault helicopter, and her eyes were shining as she looked at him with an expression that suggested eagerness for battle. That's right. We'll go take out the bad guys. Xietain replied as he stroked her silky hair and let it slide through his fingers. Sherlyn is excited. This will be the first time we fight together. Sherlyn can't wait to help father kill all the bad guys. The girl closed her eyes and smiled sweetly, even though her words weren't sweet at all, at least not from the enemy's point of view. Leader. Kong Lan looked at Xietain and made a sidelong glance at the two women sitting on the opposite side. She whispered under her breath, I understand you bringing Qingming, but why bring Zhongde's mother to the battlefield? This is what I promised her. Xietain replied indifferently, she will probably be accompanying us quite a bit. She'll help Qingming to take care of my meals and that sort of thing on her own request. I understand. Kong Lan nodded at the same time as she sighed. Zhongde's death certainly still hurt in everyone's heart, but probably none of them could compare to the pain his mother was feeling despite not showing it on the outside. Kong Lan. Yes? Upon arriving at the base, I want you to look for Fu Xiefeng and start healing both Kai Jingyi and Xin Mei. Xietain said in a cold voice. Roger. Kong Lan nodded with a serious expression. After a brief silence, she asked, You? Xietain said nothing, but that silence added to his expression was more than enough response to Kong Lan's doubt, and she simply nodded without saying anything else. Evangeline. Xietain looked at the beautiful young woman with golden hair and deep green eyes who was looking at him with an unreadable expression before slowly saying, We need to talk, don't we? Evangeline nodded silently. Xietain also nodded and looked at the others as he calmly said, We will arrive at our faction's base in about 5 hours, rest until then. He looked at Evangeline and said in a serious voice, Don't fight back. She frowned slightly with visible confusion, but an instant later her expression changed from confusion to surprise. Under the shocked eyes of Kong Lan, Qingming, and Zhongde's mother, Evangeline disappeared and soon after Xietain followed her. This? Lan Xiang looked breathlessly at the magical scene. She knew that soul evolvers were terrifying. She herself possessed some skills despite being only a level 2 human. However, this was the first time she could literally feel the two people in front of her a moment ago simply disappear from the helicopter. The Lord is the Lord after all. Qingming sighed before a small, slightly sad smile appeared on her face. I wonder how many lives will be taken this time. Hopefully, there will be no innocents involved, but given the circumstances, I'm afraid such a thing is nothing more than wishful thinking. Xietain will definitely want to gather all of Zhongde's records to bring him back to life someday. If he wants to rebuild Zhongde's soul completely, then he needs all of his records, and in order to do that he has to kill every one of those who caused him even the slightest scratch. Kong Lan was one of Xietan's loyal followers, so it was no secret to her that his highest goal was to become the most powerful existence of all, even more powerful than the soul record itself. A complicated glint shone in the eyes of the most powerful healer of the entire Transcendent faction as she looked at the place where Xietain was sitting a moment ago and said in a low voice, He will definitely kill many innocents. He won't want to risk leaving even one culprit alive. Honestly, one of the reasons I admire him the most is because despite everything he has not collapsed regardless of the ever-increasing weight he carries on his back. I think I now understand a little more the reason why my son was so willing to fight for him to the point of giving his life. Lan Xiang looked at the empty seat and said in a low voice, to be willing to do this much, regardless of sins. All for the sake of those next to him. That's the kind of person my lord is. Qingming forced a smile and said with some sadness, I hope the weight of those sins doesn't drag him down someday. Callie, who was sitting quietly on the other side of where Xietain was sitting, simply listened and took it in her heart. This is... Evangeline stood in awe as she looked at the large world that was filled with green pastures and with a bright, blue sky floating above her head. Even she who was one of the 3 most powerful soul evolvers in the entire Transcendent faction putting by. Xietain aside felt shock in her heart. This was the first time she had experienced something as magical and strange as this. When Evangeline turned around, she saw Xietain walking towards the huge mansion in the process of being finalized, and after a few seconds of consideration, she followed him close behind. The two walked in silence for a few minutes before Xietain opened his mouth to start the conversation they both knew he had to initiate. "Do you remember the first time we met?" he asked calmly. "I do." Evangeline nodded, following him closely just a few steps distant. "At that time, I, along with Bing Shui, Nangong Lingxin, and Nangong Yi, sneaked into the North Camp pretending to be normal survivors, but due to the machinations of one of the base leaders, you snuck into our building to assassinate me. Come to think of it, it's been about 9 months since we met, but it feels like we've known each other for years, don't you think?" Xietain said, recalling what happened months ago. "A lot has happened during these months." Evangeline replied calmly as the countless battles and experiences lived together with Xietain and his team began to flood into her memory. The connection between humans can become as strong as steel depending on the experiences lived together, regardless of the time shared. She said, "You're right. Whether with me or not, you are a crucial pillar of our Transcendent faction." Xietain paused and turned to look into her eyes for a few seconds before slowly saying, "Evangeline, you are one of my loyal followers, but more than a subordinate, I think of you as a good friend." Evangeline's eyes flashed slightly, but her expression remained completely unchanged as she waited for his next words. "When we first met, you set some conditions before agreeing to join our group," he said, and after a brief pause, continued, "One of those conditions was to help you take over Russian territory, as well as the Russian population. Do you remember?" Evangeline nodded, again without saying anything. Xietain closed his eyes for a moment before sighing. When he opened his eyes again, he said slowly, "Evangeline, can you tell me about your past? I know it must not have been something easy, let alone pretty to remember. Not when someone as young as you, who is maybe 1 or 2 years older than me, has such a terrifying combat ability even since before the Soul Record's arrival on Earth. If you don't want to talk about it, then that's fine, I'll understand. However, if you don't tell me anything, I might end up doing something you might not like." Xietain was going to make sure that Russia, everyone involved, paid the price for invading his country, killing his people, and being involved in the death of Zhong De. Not only Russia was going to pay, all the Chinese involved as well as the other races would feel his wrath. Xietain wanted to make sure not to do something that might hurt one of his followers in the process of avenging another, that was all. Evangeline did not immediately respond to Xietan's words, but stared intently at his face. However, as he looked at her, Xietain noticed that although her green eyes were indeed looking at him, her heart was elsewhere. This was the first time Xietain could not only feel, but also faintly see such a flood of emotions flowing through Evangeline. Sadness, helplessness, pain, but most of all, anger. Anger and thirst for vengeance so great that it did not lose to Xietan's at all. He waited patiently, they had time. 5 hours for those who were in the outside world, but 50 hours for them who were in the collector's pocket world. After almost 10 minutes, Evangeline seemed to calm down enough, and as she closed her eyes, she said in a soft, exhausted voice, "My real name is Ludmila Ilyinishna." Or at least it was, 17 years ago. Chapter 940. Her past. 17 years ago, in a white land covered with snow where the wind blew with a force capable of freezing the bones of even animals, a solitary silhouette could be seen standing next to a snowman. If a person were to see the small silhouette standing in the middle of such a barbaric environment as this one, would surely be alarmed, especially because the small silhouette was a very pretty little girl who looked to be no more than 5 or 6 years old. The girl was wearing long clothes, obviously not her size. The wool coat she wore hung down to the ground, covered with a thick layer of snow, but it was precisely this old wool coat what kept the little girl from freezing to death, as the clothes she wore underneath was all tattered and in such a deplorable state that they were a poor choice to wear even on a summer night. 7 days had passed since the girl had been left behind in this white world where all she could see was flat snow and mountains of snow. During those 7 days, the girl had shed all her tears to the point where she had nothing left to shed. Half a month ago, the girl had everything. Even she, an innocent and pure mind who knew nothing of the world, could tell that her family was wealthy enough to have a big house and many big men protecting the estate. However, none of that ever mattered to her. She was happy to have the love of her parents, mother, and an older sister who, although she didn't spend much time at home, had always spoiled her and bought her the many toys she loved so much. Unfortunately, all that had changed. The change was too abrupt, so much so that the little girl did not have time to accept that she had lost the place she had called home her whole life along with most of her life and her toys when the last doll she managed to carry with her fell out of her hands 10 days ago that night when her parents and older sister were running away with her in their arms. However, despite the love the little girl had for her toys and the pain she felt when her favorite doll left her greatest pain came when a week ago her parents hid her under heavy clothing in the cold snow, barely leaving a hole for her to breathe, and asked her to remain silent just minutes before a group of people riding snowmobiles appeared no more than 10 meters in front of her. The girl was young, very young. But even so, she would never forget what she saw and heard. Michael F., Michael F., Michael F. I bet you didn't expect this, did you? The mocking voice of the man with different colored eyes was something the girl would never forget, along with the pale face of her father when he looked at her older sister standing next to the unknown people. Christina, you. Why? The pain in her father's voice as he said those words while looking at her sister was something she would never forget, as well as the cold glance her 17-year-old older sister had on her face while she looked at her mother and father as if she was looking at a pair of strangers. Ha 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 ha. The man with different colored eyes laughed and said something that the little girl would only understand a little later, something about her sister not really being her sister. The little girl had to cover her mouth and nose to avoid making the slightest sound as her eyes widened and her green pupils trembled constantly as she saw her parents collapse in pools of blood after being stabbed by the unknown group of people. Where's that brat? The man with different colored eyes frowned, looking around the area. They probably left her behind trying to hide her in some cave, said a young man around the age of who at that time the girl thought was her beloved older sister. The man with different colored eyes looked around the grounds for a while longer before spitting on the bloodless bodies and turning to mount a snowmobile. Let's go find her, she must be around there somewhere. Sometimes, the most dangerous place turned out to be the safest. Those who murdered her parents in cold blood would never have imagined that just 10 meters away, hidden under the snow, a 5-year-old girl managed to stay motionless and silent with no sign of life without being able to do anything but watch as her loved ones left her forever. Maybe it was because of the last words her parents said to her, or maybe it was because she was too scared. The little girl could not remember the exact reason why even after 30 minutes following the departure of those men, she still remained hidden under the snow without moving. Despite being so young, despite being so innocent, the red color of the blood was unmistakable. It didn't take the girl even a second to realize that her parents were dead as she dragged her trembling body closer to them. She cried. She cried and cried. She cried so much that despite the cold and hunger she did not move from that place for 3 days and 2 nights, only eating what little food there was in her parents' backpack. The human being was truly amazing, especially when they were pushed to the lowest limits. Even a little girl between 5 and 6 years old underwent a drastic change in her personality after 1 week. The purity in her eyes as well as the innocence of her expression was gone, both being replaced by coldness and distrust. No more home, no more toys, no more parents, no more big sister. In the span of half a month, the girl had lost everything. No. Maybe not everything. She looked at the snowman and her cold eyes showed a bit of warmth as with small, careful bites. She finished her meal for the day, a pre-dried cookie. At least she wasn't alone. She had a friend right beside her. Although this friend of hers couldn't speak or move and its eyes were stones embedded in the hard snow, at least it wouldn't hurt her. Suddenly, the girl's expression changed to one of fear as she looked into the distance and noticed a silhouette approaching her through the haze. Fear turned to terror as a gray wolf stared at her with especially striking red eyes in the midst of the pale, white world. When the beast pounced towards her with a speed that most humans would not be able to respond to in time, the terror grew even more, sending a surge of adrenaline to every nerve in her body, and with an agility she didn't know she had, the little girl managed to jump to the side, narrowly avoiding the wolf's claws that could have ended her life. The girl, clearly inexperienced, fell after tripping and knocking over the snowman. However, she did not dare to stay quiet but rolled to the side again and was lucky enough to dodge the wolf's claws, again thanks to a reaction speed that at the time she thought was normal. Unfortunately, it was impossible for an inexperienced 5-year-old girl who had not eaten properly in such fierce weather to fight off a wild wolf. Although she managed to dodge the second claw attack, the wolf showed its superiority immediately by launching a bite towards her face. Just before her head was crushed, the girl instinctively raised her left hand, and a heart-rending cry of pain echoed in the silent world of snow. The blood of the girl not only splashed her face and clothes, but the previously pure white snow was dyed in crimson, feeding the desire and bloodlust of the beast, whose jaw was clenched, causing a bone fracture that once again made her howl in pain. In the midst of her despair, with death looming over her with fierce eyes, the girl tried to do the last thing she could and out of pure instinct extended her free right hand outward. She didn't know what it was that she touched, but when that hard object entered her palm, she used all that fear and despair to strike the head of the wolf, that a second later collapsed after receiving a strong impact in the temple. In the midst of pain and surprise, the girl looked at the covered in blood stone in her right hand. Her snowy friend had saved her life, but it seemed that this was the limit for her. The pain slowly began to fade, being replaced by coldness. Even with death approaching, the girl did not cry, and even as her face contorted in pain, she simply gazed up at the gray sky with a dead expression. It was at that moment that she heard again the sound of footsteps approaching in her direction, but she did not move. It was probably another wolf anyway. She had only defeated one wolf by sheer luck. How could she be able to defeat another beast in her current condition? A few seconds later, the sound of footsteps stopped right behind her. However, what the girl heard was not the growl of a bear or the howl of a wolf, but the voice of a human. As expected of a genetically modified human. Not only did you manage to survive this climate for all this time despite the bad feeding and being without shelter, but you managed to take down a gray wolf. The girl softly moved her head upwards, and there she saw the first human who, although she didn't understand what he was saying, at least didn't look like he had any intentions of harming her. We'll see what comes of this. The man pulled out a syringe and approached the girl's broken and injured arm. She might have cried or screamed in pain in the past at the sight of the needle, but her present self had seen, heard, and lived too much to feel fear over something so small and insignificant. She didn't even feel fear when she saw how much of the flesh on her forearm was gone. Forget about a needle. The girl watched indifferently as the red liquid disappeared inside her body, and soon enough the pain disappeared and the bleeding stopped. Instead, she began to feel drowsy, and the last she knew was her body being lifted and carried somewhere. I, along with a small group of children, was trained by a Russian organization operating from the shadows with no particular supporters. Starting with endurance and flexibility, our bodies were exposed to all kinds of extreme situations. We were trained in all kinds of martial arts destined to end our opponent's life either by using firearms or toothpicks. For years, we were put on trial in environments that even the most tenacious of men would succumb to, in less than 2 hours. Evangeline opened her eyes and said slowly as she looked at Bizemin, "It wasn't until later that I learned a little about my family. My father, Mykolaiv Ilyinishna, worked for the right and was an important scientist who with his team managed to develop a drug capable of enhancing the natural qualities of a normal human by 2 to 10 times. When the left-wing government took leadership for the first time, Various strings began to be pulled to gradually clean up the influence that the previous government had left behind and still had. My family was among the targets to be eliminated. Xietain looked at the young woman in front of him in total silence. He didn't know what to say or do, as he didn't even have control over his own thoughts or feelings. Evangeline had only given him a very, very brief summary of her past. However, that brief summary was enough for Xietain to feel a great wave of sadness flooding his chest to the point of almost leaving him out of breath, even with 2 triggers of the skill Blood Berserker's Wrath active. He could practically see how an innocent and joyful girl went from having everything to having nothing, from happiness to indifference, from purity to cruelty. It was only then that he finally understood the reason why Evangeline's indifference felt so different from Shangguan Bingshui's indifference. Shangguan Bingshui's indifference made everyone keep their distance from her out of respect and feelings of inferiority, but Evangeline's indifference was as lethal as a sharp knife that people would rather stay away from to avoid being cut to pieces. I changed my name to Evangeline now. As for Ludmila Ilyinishna, she died when she was 5 years old in some snowy forest far from Moscow. Evangeline's expression was indifferent as she spoke about her past, but her next words were uttered with excitement as great as that of a child eager for the coming Christmas. I want only one thing. If she is alive, I want her life. Her? Xietain looked at her with surprise and confusion. Evangeline's eyes blazed with such a burning fire that she looked like someone else as she said slowly but firmly, Kristina Ilyinishna. The person I saw as an older sister and betrayed my family.